Greetings. Welcome to the Urban Fantasy Track from DragonCon. I guess I better add that. We're very glad to be here with everyone who will be watching us tonight. And if you'll be watching later, we're excited to be discussing season 1 of Supernatural, what we're calling the Supernatural Rewind series. And I had a couple of reasons for wanting to do this, one of which was when the Urban Fantasy Track was formed at DragonCon. The show was in its 8th season, and I had some notes, because everybody knows that I have my notebooks, but I didn't have notebooks for the first 7 seasons, and I was like, well, I better get on the ball. And I thought, well, after the show ended, it seemed as though that was an appropriate time to actually go back and watch things from the beginning anyway. So that's the purpose. Just in terms of being able to enjoy it again, that was my ulterior motive for choosing to do this. And so we will be doing one each month. And I do have a wonderful group of panelists with me this evening, and I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves first, and then we'll get going with some questions. If you're watching live and you would like to take part in the conversation by either making comments or asking questions of your own, please do so, and we will address those. And we'll start with Rachel.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rachel Graves, and I'm an urban fantasy author who's been a fan of Supernatural pretty much from the beginning. Let's see, I've watched every show, read most of the tie-in novels. I did the jigsaw puzzle. I own multiple t-shirts, and I had the tattoo for a little bit. So I'm really excited to be here and talk about a world that I find super inspiring and just really vast and cool.
Now, I heard the words jigsaw puzzle, which I did not know there was such a thing. So I'm not particularly surprised. I didn't know.
It's not an easy jigsaw puzzle. I can send you mine. Yeah.
Oh, it's not that, okay. Well,
it's in front of the white clapboard church, and it's the guys, and it's all black and gray. 1,000 shades of black and gray.
Oh, okay. In 12,000 pieces, right? Oh my. Kristen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Jackson. I'm a graphic designer and freelance artist. I work mostly with the people in the film industry. And I got into Supernatural right from the very beginning, first episodes. And I've followed the paths of the characters all the way through. And so it's been an absolute delight to go back to the season 1 and rewatch and think of how far the show came from those original first season episodes. So I'm really looking forward to being able to talk about those tonight.
Great. So are we. That's Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Z. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy and urban fantasy, and as Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. I got into Supernatural halfway through the 11th season, fell in love, binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months so I could start live tweeting at the beginning of season 12. This is now my 4th rewatch. I run the Supernatural TFWNC fan group on Facebook. I was asked to write a chapter, and Linda Zuberna says, "There'll be peace when you are done." It spawned an entire new pen name and subgenre for me, thanks to reading fan fiction and slash. And I love it, and it has changed my life and brought me into a wonderful fandom. And I also brought a cheat sheet, which is the first season official guide, so I can look for that.
Good for you. Well, that's fine, because we may need to compare notes. Beth.
Hey, I'm Beth Dolgner. I write paranormal fiction and nonfiction. I've been a Supernatural fan since the pilot episode first aired. Back then, there was a giant X-Files shaped hole in my heart, and I was looking for something a new show to get into, and Supernatural seemed like a natural choice, and I was hooked from the pilot episode. So I'm like Gail and Kristen. It's really exciting to go back and do yet another rewatch of season 1.
Yeah.
And Mark.
It's funny you say that, Beth, because I had a dead zone shaped hole in my heart. So,
Oh,
so
I can sympathize then. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Mark Spile. I'm a filmmaker, writer, co-host of the podcast Genre Entertainment. Been a fan of Supernatural since the very beginning. I've been watching the show. I've never mentioned this in any of the other ones we've done with Supernatural. I just realized it's very relevant, but I made a web series called Reality to Man where they go in these virtual reality TV shows and have like parodies of shows. And there's one where they meet the Colt brothers. So I have like a Supernatural
Oh,
callback, and it just now struck to me.
oh,
So that's how much I love Supernatural. So
wow. Yeah, that every time we do one of these panels, we find out a little bit more about people. Now, a couple of you have mentioned of having done these rewatches, but I've got to tell you, and I'm probably going to reduce my cred considerably by saying this, but I will say that as track director, I have a lot of other things I have to watch, so um, that for most of season one, I had not seen. Now, I mean, since it originally aired, I've watched it since it started. I've been there since the very first episode, and actually watched them in live time. Back at that time, we didn't have as many options, so so it's been really quite an interesting experience. Now that I know I had seen the pilot more than once, since then. But I actually rewatched the pilot right before the finale, the series finale, just to see how they were bookending them and everything. But for me, it's been a very interesting experience. So some of you have will have much more an extensive memory, perhaps, than those of us who've only seen them, the one time. But I do have my notebook, so we're good, and we've got Gil's complete guide. Now, my first question is about. I guess it's kind of an obvious one for when you're talking about a whole season at once. Do you what for you were some of the standout episodes? And if you don't have names and you just remember what they were about, that's fine. But what were some of the standout episodes for you? And also, as a kind of a part B to that question, what was the creepiest to you? I mean, because let's face it, there were some really creepy ones in this season, and based on whatever you consider creepy. And was there one of the episodes that you really just were not a fan of that you feel as though they could have left out and it would have been fine? I mean, other than the fact that it, you know, um, that it was still part of their story, but you didn't really care as much about the story that the guys found themselves in, if that makes sense. And Rachel, we'll start with you.
Oh, I'm glad I wrote notes. So two of my answers are the same, and it's the creepiest and the one that could have been left out. I didn't like Bugs. Potentially not the actual name because I hate that episode and I always skip it. And I'm not a fan of Bugs. I don't like the dynamic in the relationship. It doesn't feel spooky enough to me. I'm a ghost story kind of girl, and I loved this first season because of the number of ghost stories we had and how well developed they were and how it wasn't obvious. At the end of the pilot, when we have a woman in white whose evil children come after her, that was an amazing twist. And Bugs was about bugs. And hey, I guess. I don't watch my exterminator walk around the house, and I didn't want to watch Bugs. So yeah, not my favorite. But the best one for me, the standout, was Dead in the Water. And what I love about Dead in the Water, that's the one with the family that lives on the lake and they're all drowning and we don't know why, is really the difference we see in Dean and Sam in that episode than we see at the end of the show. The arc is so different. Dean is connecting with a little kid, which we've almost never seen, and even Sam is shocked by. Sam is
Right.
almost mercenary in that episode. Like he's got places to be and he's not worrying about leading people or taking care of people. So it's nice to see them at that point in their life surprising each other, and it's a great ghost story, and it's really cool how it all works out. So if I had to recommend just one, it would be Dead in the Water, and if I could lose one, it'd be Bugs. Easily.
Okay, well, let me confess. Now, Gail already knows this, and I think we may have mentioned it before. Bugs is the one episode I've never seen.
Don't.
And the originally when it was on, when it aired back in 2005, I was actually using a VCR to record things when if I had to work at night or whatever, I wasn't home yet. And that for some reason that one got skipped. And when I found out what it was about, I was like, well, that's okay then. And then when I found out some of the details about the episode, I decided to skip it in the rewatch. So that's the only episode I've never seen and will never see. But anyway, Melissa says that she likes bugs. I'm weird. No, I mean that's fine if you like it, but I'm just saying. Okay. Kristen, what about you?
Yeah. Well, I'll join Melissa that I'm kind of a contrarian, that I like bugs too. So we can keep bugs.
Mhm.
And I also want to say, look at these guys. Look at these faces. They are
I
children.
know.
They're children. They're babies. They were hired
Yeah.
like right out of grade school. I don't understand how they got the job. And I love, also, I'll agree with Rachel that with Dead in the Water, when I was first trying to introduce my mom to the series, she's always like, I really don't like horror. I said, well, we've been watching Dead Zone for quite a while. I think if you like Dead Zone, you'll like this show. And she was like, I don't know, maybe, okay, I'll watch one. So I'm thinking, okay, so out of all the episodes I could show her to make a great first impression,
Right.
which would it be? And so I showed her Dead in the Water, and afterwards she was kind of sitting there going, can we watch another? And I was like, got her. So for me, season 1 was just full. Every episode I'm looking at thinking that's a favorite, and that's a favorite, and that's a favorite. Like Asylum and Scarecrow, and I mean, I'm just going through Home. I mean, that was such an emotional episode.
Oh yeah.
But for me, I guess the favorite of all the mini favorites was Faith, and I can watch that one over and over again. It has like one of the best entrances for music, when they're playing Don't Fear the Reaper. That is one of the most dramatic scenes, I think, for like most of the entire series, that sequence. So I don't know. I had just a blast rewatching the first season because I haven't watched it in years, and I'm thinking, why haven't I watched it in years? Because this is great stuff. So.
But that's because because now you can experience it and feel as though, oh well, I have missed something. It's a good feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Gail, what about you?
I agree with Kristen on the fact that season 1 was one great ghost story or haunting after another, and we were uncomplicated from the heaven and hell and the demon blood and Sam's destiny. It was just two guys in a great car riding around the back roads, saving people and hunting things, which was just fantastic. And I loved the simplicity of that, especially going back now and rewatching it and going, wow, things were so simple back then. I also agree. I didn't hate bugs. And the thing about it that I found really important in the rewatch was that Sam gains some real understanding about John. After watching the dynamics of the father and son with the house, Sam's attitude changes very importantly for the rest of the season toward John, and he's growing up. And that was an important piece. The other episode everybody loves to hate this season for some verifiable reasons is Route 666. Racist truck. It's problematic.
Yeah.
I just rewatched it though, and there were some good pieces we see a lot of Dean's vulnerability. This is the first time we really see behind the shell on Dean to say he's not as hard-boiled as he wants everybody to think. And even though Cassie ditched Dean Winchester, hard as it is to believe. She was a little spitfire, and I really liked her. So that was good. Favorites, I would say, aside from the pilot, would be Bloody Mary and Asylum, Scarecrow, The Benders, and Provenance. And the one I could do without is Hell House, because I really hate the Ghost Facers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that episode was interesting, I thought, because it had its moments, and yet I can see why you said that. But that's interesting that you mentioned the Benders. We'll have to see if anybody else has anything to say about that one. Beth.
I feel like, well, the pilot's always going to be my favorite episode, because to me that's just like the gateway into this world. But I feel like every time I rewatch season 1, I have a different favorite episode. And this time around, it was Asylum. And I just liked the simplicity of it. It was just a good little horror show. And I liked that. I liked just the kind of the scare tactics and kind of that old school horror movie magic that they used to make it. What I think is strange, though, like I said, I have watched season 1 multiple times. The one I was not looking forward to was Bugs. But somehow my brain completely forgot that the Benders even existed. So we got to that episode and I was like, I don't remember this one. What's the storyline? And as we got deeper and deeper into it, I was like, yeah, I think maybe my brain just chose to forget that because it's so creepy to me. So yeah, I don't like it when the evil thing is just people, and it just really creeped me out. And I mean, it was a well done episode. It was very, very well done, but I just don't like it. I would probably rather watch Bugs again than watch the Benders. And that's saying something.
I can't compare. So yeah. Marks, what about you?
So, the pilot is definitely a classic. It sets everything up. So it's definitely stands out a lot. I think some other ones that stood out to me, there's a lot of standouts because there's so many firsts in this season. What was really cool looking back at now and knowing not only how it ends, but also like that first 5 seasons or so of Kripke's being a showrunner, seeing how he's really started everything to wrap up, at that point. Because we get everything. We get all the main big bads, right? Except for we only get a mention of a werewolf, and we don't get angels, of course. But we get like almost everything else. Reapers and a pagan god, or at least related to a pagan god, and all of it, even ghost facers. So
right. Number of people in the comments decided they did, or have said that they didn't care for them either. So you weren't alone, Gail.
So I think some of my favorites, would be like, Something Wicked, because the flashbacks were really crucial, and it was the first of those flashbacks that we get a lot more. Dead Man's Blood was great. It was great to see some vampires, and then the cult is such an iconic kind of tool. And of course, the last 2 episodes, and for one of the more creepier ones, I would say, I don't know. It's so I liked Bloody Mary. What I thought was funny in Bloody Mary is that there's a girl in there named Charlie, and it's like, oh, we get another Charlie later.
Yeah.
Okay, so worst, so I've always hated Bugs, and I still don't like it a lot, but because it's about the ending for me. I watched it again. I was like, this actually isn't too bad, but then I got to the ending. I'm like, now I remember why I hate it. I thought that the wrap up of that story was it's like a bit of a hot mess. So, so I still don't like Bugs because of that. And there's actually a lot of good stuff in there up to that point that I liked in it, that I was surprised I liked. And then I also didn't really like Benders. I didn't like Benders because maybe it was a little too early in the series to have humans be bad guys. Maybe like that contrast a little bit later. And also, I don't know. Those 2 brothers were a little goofy for me. It was inadvertently comedic to me. Now the daughter and the father, excellent. Those actors did a fantastic job. I do not want to sit by them on a bus. The brothers are just a little.
I'm with you, Marks.
Yeah, the brothers are just a little silly, and that took away some of the fear factor of it all. But yeah, that's my overview of how I feel.
Yeah,
else on
Go ahead.
bugs before we move on?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had a chance to interview Carrie Genzel, who was the real estate agent who dies in the shower in Bugs.
Oh, don't talk about spiders, though, please.
Oh.
Ah,
Just call them puppies.
yeah, no, that's one. Once I found out there, I was like, yeah, no, that's a bridge too far for me. I'm sorry.
There is an episode where she talks about it, which is at least with me, and I know she's talked about it with other people. The other thing I wanted to just mention is the Dead in the Water became very important after when we came into season 15 with 1520, because the vampire that gets away in Dead in the Water is the one who's there in the barn.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of interesting because, it's like a cycle, right? Because that episode starts because a hunter missed some vampires and then they get him and kill him. And then Dean, he missed a vampire and then he gets killed.
And that's episode 120 and 1520. So got these bookends going left and right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that. But I find it interesting about the benders. That I agree with. I'm completely on the same page as Mark's with that one. And Beth, I believe you said you also didn't care for that one. I think it's a lot creepier when you have human monsters, and it's kind of like, well, if I really want to watch that, I'd be watching something else. But rather than that. But occasionally, it's not as though there aren't people who qualify as human monsters. Look what the preacher's wife in Faith was doing. Getting the Reaper to do her bidding and stuff like that. So, she was a monster, of course, herself, but there was just something about it. And, they didn't exactly go all the way there, but the fact that, the implication was, well, what did these people do? And what was that guy? What was the father chopping up in the other room? And it's like and cannibalism is one of those things that I'm just like, oh, no, make it go away. Yeah. We're not going there. So, so I'm in agreement on the benders. Now, my next question for you guys has to do with some of the individual guest characters. Who were some of the ones that you particularly enjoyed? And they even if they're people that we see again, but I'm talking about ones that were, basically in this one episode, and we don't necessarily see them again, or if we do, maybe only a couple of times. Not like Bobby, because it needs to be understood that everybody loves Bobby, period. If you don't, then I'm kidding. But I'm kidding, and yet I'm not. But aside from him, who we only see in one episode in this season, who were some of the guest characters that really resonated with you the most? Somebody that you enjoyed them and their story. And Kristen, we'll start with you.
You might have to come back to me because that is a highly specific question, and
okay,
I am
all right,
just not.
That's fine. Okay, Gail, what about you? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, the hate to bring up the benders again, but the sheriff.
Oh yeah.
I really liked her, and if I'm not mistaken, that episode supposedly happened in Hibbing, Minnesota. I wish she'd have shown up at the Hibbing Sheriff's Convention where Jody and Donna were.
Right.
Can you imagine Sam and Dean running into not just Donna, but this other sheriff going, oh, it's fake name. No, it's other fake name. No, it's, and it would have been really fun. But she was kind of a proto Jody, and I would have loved to have seen more of her. I thought she was interesting. We did get to see more of Sarah from Providence, but only when she got killed. And even if Cassie hadn't been a love interest for Dean, I would have loved to have seen her reemerge somewhere, maybe because she was a journalist and now she knows this stuff is real and she gets into hunting from a research perspective or something. And it not only would have helped the show's diversity, but I really liked that character, and I could just see her being an annoying ex to Dean.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For them to have exes who are actually still alive is kind of unusual anyway. So,
That's asking a lot.
yeah.
I did think of someone. So the
Okay,
gal
Kristen, we'll go.
the gal from Sam's college that needed help in skin.
Becky.
Oh, yeah.
Rebecca.
So I'm glad she made it through the entire episode alive. She didn't die, and she came around in the end and helped out. So I was kind of glad that somebody was saved and made it through, who was the female, in peril character. So.
True.
Yeah, I also liked Cassie and was sorry not to see her ever come back. Because I know 100, right, and she played Vixen briefly on the Arrow.
That's where I'd seen her before. Then she looked familiar, and I was like, okay.
I also Missouri Mosley, right? Is that the right name? Yeah, she was great. That actress is awesome. Would love to have seen her more, and I think they tried to get her more, but they just couldn't make it work. Gosh, so few people survive. But that sheriff also, I was thinking that when I finished that episode with that sheriff, I also thought, well, she reminds me of what we eventually get as a sheriff character. So she turned into a really cool character too. That would have been nice to have it come back. So.
Well, Missouri Mosley, Pastor Jim, Daniel Elkins, and Caleb all have much larger, fuller lives in fan fiction than they ever got in the show.
Really? Good.
Yeah.
One episode, or Missouri's case 2, and then die. And they end up being recurring secondary characters in an awful lot of fan fiction stories just because people have built out a bigger Hunter world. So I have to remind myself that in canon, oops, there he is. He's dead now.
Right. Yeah. Now here, Melissa is agreeing with you, Marks, that she thinks Missouri is fantastic. Beth, what about you?
I also really like Missouri, and I am really disappointed that we didn't wind up getting to see more of her in future episodes. And maybe I'm the only one here who feels this way, but I actually like the Ghost Facers. So much so, sorry, Gail, so much so that when they came on the screen, I actually started singing their theme song. And I think part of the reason I like them so much is that I have worked with a lot of ghost hunters, doing research for my nonfiction work. And every now and then you meet somebody who's a little bit like the Ghost Facers. And so I feel like I can kind of relate, So yeah, I always get a kick out of them because as kind of ridiculous as they are, I can totally see the basis in reality. So it's always fun for me to see them on screen.
I live by WWBD. What would Buffy do?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, when they said that, I was like, okay, those guys are okay in my book, even if they are ridiculous. But yeah, Rachel, what about you?
So I have two weird ones. I really liked Emily from Scarecrow. She was the niece, if I'm getting my names right. So this idea that she lived up in this pagan town and she grew up there and her only living relatives were sort of horrible people, and then she fights at the end. I would have loved to see her pop up again. I thought her backstory was something that would have been interesting to see how she handles things. But the really random one that everybody's going to be shocked by, Bobby's dog.
Oh yeah.
The beautiful Rottweiler sitting on the top of a truck being a really good dog, and then just gets killed off screen, and we never see it again. Like, we find out about Bobby's wife and Bobby's life and his house and apple pies and like everything about Bobby, and that dog never gets mentioned again. And that was problematic for me.
It makes you feel better, Rachel. Rumsfeld also gets a much longer life.
Good.
I hadn't even remembered that he got killed in the episode. He shows up in so many fan fiction stories.
Good.
So
well, there you go. See? Yeah.
Hey, Rumsfeld.
Yeah, that is funny, that name. So now one of the other things that I kept making note of while I was watching were things that I was considering foreshadowing, or, what we know is going to happen in the future. Whether it's coming up soon or whether it's coming up, a ways in the, in whether it's going to be a while, whether it's going to be several seasons or not. And, one example was when it's in the last episode in Devil's Trap, where they have Meg, the still possessed Meg, tied to the chair, and Dean tells her, well, if you are lying to me right now, I'm telling you right now, I will march into hell myself and kill every one of you. And I thought, oh, dude, do not say that. If only you knew what's going to happen to you. So, I mean, there are things like that I think, they do a good job of in this first season of setting things up. And what I wanted to find out from you guys was, did you have any points like that, or if you'd rather not address that, what were some of your impressions of, in particular, Sam and Dean, and even Dawn, if you want, as the early impressions of their characters, and how you see that, like how did they get from where they were in the very beginning of the season to either later on in the series, or to just even at the end of season one. But if you're not into the whole foreshadowing thing, you can go with the character thing. But let's see, Kristen, we'll start with you this time.
Okay. Well, yeah. I guess for me, what jumped out was seeing when in the episode Scarecrow, when Dean and Sam had a fight, and Sam had been driving too, which I was watching. I was like, he's behind the wheel.
Yeah, I know. I made a note of that too. I was like, oh my God,
he's driving. And then he pulls over, and they have a fight, and then he's like, I'm done with it. I'm done with you. I'm just going to walk out. I'm going to California. You go your way. And Dean then just left them there. And so I thought that was kind of a foreshadowing of some of their brotherly separations, even though it only took them, half an episode to get back together again. It's that sort of dynamic of both of them being very headstrong and willing to just walk away in the moment kind of called out to me that's something that's going to keep coming back up over and over, that we see for the rest of the 15 seasons.
True. Gail?
A couple of things, and it actually sort of surprised me when I went back and watched some of them, how clear some of this stuff was. It was almost like they were paying attention to their own show.
Yeah.
Almost, yeah.
Sometimes more than others. But when Sam is arguing with Dean in either Salvation or Devil's Trap, and Dean says, boy, you're more like Dad than I thought. You're both so willing to sacrifice yourself. And I'm thinking it's a Winchester trait, because how many times does Dean sacrifice himself? Mm-hmm. So that was a sort of ouch. He also tells Sam in one of the episodes toward the end, you guys want to do this, but I'm going to be the one who buries you.
Yeah.
And that really hurt, especially knowing what's coming, at the end of season 2. Sam's argument that with Max and Andy and those, the special children, that it's not who you are, it's what you do, really rings, right? Because that becomes kind of Sam's centering point of not being evil. And then there's Dean going, what's dead should stay dead. And, well, that didn't work too well. And how willing he was to torture Meg in Devil's Trap. I'm thinking, you had a little bit of it in you before Alistair got you, because Dean was really scary, threatening her. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay, I see where there could have been a seed there.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Beth?
I have a couple. One of them that I just found amusing is the first time they mentioned demons. I forget which episode, but their reaction is kind of like, "Oh, demons it's so rare and they're so dangerous and scary." And I'm thinking, "Yeah, Dean, you're going to be BFFs with Crowley someday, so just get over it." But the other thing I noticed this time around that I had never really consciously noticed before. Dean has always been kind of like a ladies' man. He's always flirting. He's always, but I felt like maybe the first 5 or 6 episodes, it was a little too much for me this time around. Like it was a little misogynistic sometimes, and I had never felt that way before. So I don't know if it's because I'm older now, or if it's just because kind of our perception of what's appropriate and what's not has changed. But I was happy to see that fade as the season went on, and he kind of became the Dean as that he was in later seasons, where he still likes ladies, but it's a little less aggressive.
Right. I get your point, though. I understand what you mean. It didn't really strike me as being offensive, but it struck me as being more ridiculous, I guess. But
it wasn't offensive. Right. Yeah, it was like right on the border for me.
Yeah, but it was still it was. I can see where I would be annoying. Yeah. It was good that they toned that down. I agree with that.
Yes, absolutely.
Marks.
Yeah, so I think they did a great job in this season balancing kind of a monster of the week with the relationship between the brothers, and it was strong throughout. They touched on it constantly, but it never got old, and it kept moving forward in this season. So I think that was very well done. I don't know if this will become anything we're going to talk about later or not, but since Beth mentioned it about demons and stuff, I thought it was really interesting how when you see this first season, they're still trying to figure out some of the rules in this world.
Right.
Like we get like, oh, I smell ozone. That's a sign of ghosts. I'm like, what? I don't remember doing that ever again. Or oh, cat's eye shells, and I'm like, what's cat's eye shells? I don't remember ever doing that. Or like 3 episodes, the third ghost isn't until the third ghost when they're like, yeah, we've always used these shotgun rounds of salt. Yeah, I totally forgot to do that before. And that's such a a major thing for the rest of the show. That was great. But with demons, I thought it was really interesting choice because it seems like demons were going to be different kinds of demons, and that they were like, I don't know if that raw head thing was supposed to be a demon or not. That was very short. And then of course those shadow demons that we had in Shadows. So I kind of wonder what their first thought was, because obviously after this season where they shift really hard to the possession, the demons we all know, right? Mm-hmm. So it was interesting for them to discover that, and what I kind of love about this early season, which someone touched on too, is that they're still trying to figure out the rules of this world too. I guess all the writers are figuring out, the characters are too. And they're like, oh yeah, vampires aren't extinct. Oops. And all that stuff. So they're so naive back then. It's kind of nice.
Right. Well, what about that cracked me up in that episode, because I had totally forgotten this, because 15 years ago, and the comment that in that particular episode, when Dean says vampires, it just gets funnier every time I hear it. And it's like, it's like, what? It's like everything else you're up against, and you think that vampires would be, hard to believe. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Rachel, what about you?
Okay, I can't let the opportunity to mention one of my favorite fairy tales go by. Raw Head and Bloody Bones is a traditional fae.
So, okay.
So that's and shows up in a couple of other different urban fantasy books, but really kind of a creepy fairy, which is funny when we have Fight the Fairies later on. And so to me, one of the neat things about season 1 is seeing those little bits of foreshadowing. And the hard one for me was in Devil's Trap, where Dean's dad is telling him, oh, I'm proud of you. You did what you could. You defended this family. And Dean has to say, oh, no, you can't be my dad. My dad would never actually be proud of me. And that vulnerability and that betrayal and that hurt, to me, is really Dean's life story in 3 scenes. If he loves someone, they die. And nobody ever really takes the time to say, no, you did good. And it just, to me, that was really painful to watch, because it goes back to everything we saw in that last season where he was saying we need a win, and I'm just looking for someone to come through, and his inability to protect people, like that really hurts him, and it even tore up his character way back then. So I did not expect that episode to be as hard for me to watch, just from the emotions there. The one thing I did want to ask, if I can't remember it coming up, if anybody else does. So the yellow-eyed demon calls out Meg has his daughter, and says the other demon was his son, and they're like a demon Brady bunch. Do we ever see that again?
They have children. Yeah.
In the
Does
anime, Meg has a backstory.
Okay.
Oh.
And it explains where but that's kind of the non-canon canon. It's official, but
Right.
it's not canon.
Yeah, so I'm kind of bummed they dropped that. I think that would have been neat, like the whole Winchester family versus the demon family and how that all goes.
Well, one of the things that really struck me when I heard it was when it was in the Faith episode when Sam is taking Dean, when he's telling him, I'm taking you to this place to see what we can do to make you not die or whatever. But Dean says, "Well, I'm going to die, and you can't stop it." And Sam says, "Watch me."
Yeah.
And I thought that's kind of like that's the premise of the whole series, right? from halfway through, which I think that was like the 12th episode or something. It's in the middle of the season. So it's like, well, that's kind of a bit of a setup, for us right there at that point. And I think, you don't necessarily think so when you see it the first time or when you hear it the first time, but after 15 years later, it's like, oh yeah, well, that's what they're going to keep doing for all this time. Now, we did have, now you mentioned the anime, Gail, and that's oh, thank you, Renita. Okay, this is did anyone rewatch the Supernatural anime? I have not, but has anybody seen it?
Yeah,
I've seen some of it.
Watched it 3 times.
Wow.
4 times.
Oh, well.
Maybe. Yeah. I didn't
Cool.
watch it in conjunction with this, but it has some interesting backstories. It also gives you Jake's backstory. The Jake Talley, the one who stabbed Sam and all hell breaks loose. And it's an interesting addition. The other thing that really broke my heart, Carol, in the rewatch on season 1 was the pilot. We see Dean cocky and joking with Sam, hey Tiger, and just perfect Dean Winchester armor. And now we know he stood outside for hours, afraid to go in and afraid that Sam was just going to tell him he wanted to see him again. And to muster up that bravado like nothing was wrong. Of course, aren't you glad to see me, kiddo? Oh man,
Right.
Knowing what was going on inside, that like broke my heart.
Yeah, it's I agree. That was I think the pilot episode is amazing. I mean, it really does. It really does give us a good snapshot of what's to come in just that 44 minutes or 42 minutes, however long it actually is when you cut out the commercials, of course. Now, my next question has to do with the theme. What do you think the kind of the overriding theme from the season was? And, or do you think it had one? Do you think we've touched on some of that? But for you, what did it feel like? And Beth, we'll start with you this time.
I mean, I think for me, it's what the whole series has been, and we've talked about quite a bit on other panels, that it's about family. It's about that relationship between the brothers, because no matter what kind of monster of the week they're facing, there is always something significant in the development of their relationship with each other, whether it's some kind of a revelation, whether it's some kind of, development and how well they work with each other. I just feel like we always get a little bit more and a little bit more about that. So to me, at the end of the day, it's always about the brothers.
As it should be when it comes
As
down
it should
to
be.
it. Marks?
Yeah, I was going to say similar. It's about family, about the brothers, and then their interaction with their father, and anytime they're able to put that in some of those episodes, they're always trying to make that connection. Like, your what was it with the Striga episode? Like, you're a big brother too, and
Yeah.
they try to put that in there quite a bit. So it's definitely a big theme for that whole show, and yeah, I think that would be it. And I guess you even tied in right with the Yellow-Eyed Demon and his kids. Family
Right,
versus
right, yeah,
family.
yeah. Demon family, yeah. And speaking of that Striga episode, that was really good too, I thought. And when you're talking about Dean and Gail, when you were talking about Dean and his bravado and the front he has to put up, and I mean, can we all agree that John just treats him like crap, no matter
yeah.
what age he is? Like, oh my God. To be honest, I had forgotten how bad it was, and I think I'd kind of put it.
Mhm.
But yeah, so anyway, Rachel, what about you?
I wish I had more time to clearly articulate this, but I think there is a theme of obligation to family and remorse or guilt over what your choices were. Because I see a lot in this season of dysfunctional families and people who have made choices that they just barely can live with. And they're like, especially in Bloody Mary, we see a lot of people who, even if they haven't
Oh
been,
yeah,
prosecuted by the law, they're destroying themselves. And I think a lot of that is on Sam and Dean. Sam feels very guilty for leaving the family business, and Dean feels guilty for pulling Sam back in, and John is just a monster. And an abusive parent on every level that bothers me. But yeah, there's a lot here that's about guilt and about feeling guilty for making choices that serve yourself. And I don't think the show ever resolves that. I don't think that it ever strikes a good balance between I have to do what's good for me and I want to support my family.
yeah, okay. Kristen.
For me, season one, it's a quest story. First and foremost, the quest to find what happened to their father and where he is.
Mhm.
And it's two brothers who are trying to reconnect as adults. So the dynamic between when the age difference was, Dean was becoming an adult while Sam was still in the teenage years. And so now they're reconnecting, and Sam is on a different footing. He's more of a mature adult. He's been in college. He's got goals in life. And Dean is having to learn to adjust his perception of who Sam is. That he hasn't known Sam in that stage of his life yet.
Right.
So it's the two brothers trying to learn to reconnect when they're both on a very different footing age-wise than they were when they had been when Sam left the family. So that's kind of what I see them, slowly inching back together and feeling each other out throughout the season.
Yeah, to add to what Kristen said, if I remember correctly, hope I'm not misremembering this, but I feel like in that season one that they did a marketing campaign where they were dropping hints from the journal and stuff to people, and so it was really about that mystery. I kind of missed that. I don't know if they ever really did that at later seasons, but that was really cool.
So, and I did a 100 km run actually that took us from points to points on the journal. So it had pages from the journal. The metal was amazing. It was baby. But yeah, there was so much mystery around John's journal and what did it mean and where were we going? And then John just was a horrible parent in the end, and that's not really that fun. I'm sorry. What was the next question?
Well, yeah, we have several of our commenters, which I'll show here in just a minute. I'll just go ahead and do it now. That agree with our feelings about John. Yeah, John, his A+ parenting. He acts like a drill sergeant with Dean instead of a dad.
And I have to say, I caught that last one, the drill sergeant. And yeah, agree, Melissa, the really big bad, right? In the first episode, when we see Sam at college and Sam's starting to get some of his hunting skills back, and he talks about, wow, it comes right back to you. And wow, you really realize these kids never had a childhood.
Mhm.
Like they were breaking and entering when they should have been in school.
Right,
And
right.
yeah.
I did love that interaction. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go
I
ahead.
did. I love that interaction with John and Sam, where John's like, when you first born, I saved $100 for your college, and I did that every month or whatever, blah blah blah. I didn't want this life for you and stuff. And then they're like, so what'd you do with that money? I bought ammo with it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was just it was like, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. And Gail, I don't know that we got to you on the overriding theme of the season, so we somehow got sidetracked by how awful John is. But anyway, apparently that was one of the themes of the season.
One of the thing that really caught me this time was in Devil's Trap when they're in the car driving away and John's yelling at Sam for not shooting him, for wasting a bullet, that getting the demon comes before everything, and Sam says, no sir, not before everything.
And he looks at Dean. Yeah,
that echoed Dean in the church at Ilchester telling Sam that there was nothing, past or present, he would put in front of Sam. And so it just lasts the entire 15 seasons that nothing comes before family, and especially before each other. I had to laugh that John Winchester's A+ parenting is a frequent tag in fan fiction that is going to be the bad guy. So when you see that this is going to be John as the bad guy.
Right. So it's kind of a heads up on that one, yeah.
And that scene in Devil's Trap too, that really I thought was very significant, where Dean has the gun on his father, and Sam comes into the room, and
what are you doing?
He's torn between the two, but in the end, he trusts Dean's perspective and what he's doing more than he would trust his father. And so I thought that was a great, like a throughout their, the whole first season, when they're trying to find a way to work together and connect as brothers, and the trust issue is kind of a little shaky and sometimes, but in that moment he trusted Dean with all his heart. So I thought that was a really just a really powerful moment.
And can't we say that Dean really raised Sam? I mean, John, that parenting was non-existent, but Dean has always looked out for Sam.
He's his protector. Yeah.
And Renita had a good comment here that Dean shielded Sam a lot, which allowed Sam to be more independent in his thoughts regarding their upbringing. And that reminds me, the comment there reminds me of when I was in season 15, the episode where we have the flashback, and Dean never did tell Sam about the fact that they found all those kids, that he found all those kids in that pile, that he never shared that with him. So that's a good example of that it started young and it continued for a while. So
I did a panel with two psychologists talking about Winchester intergenerational trauma and abandonment. And one of the things we talked about was that John thought Henry had abandoned him. We don't know what effect that had on John's mother, probably not a good one. We know what really happened to Henry, but John never did. So John was abandoned by his father. John largely abandoned the boys when they were little because of his own trauma. Dean never abandoned Sam. And that's why Sam could be a good parent to Dean Jr., because Dean broke the cycle of intergenerational trauma by parenting Sam as well as he could and better than they had, which, just takes this to another whole deep level. Holy hell, I wonder if they really meant to put that in there, or did it just, are we seeing things, or were they just sort of amazing?
You know, John
well-
really. I think I also thought it was funny because John conflicts or has problems with everybody, right? Because like the dude who got killed by the vampires, like, well, we used to be best friends, we had a falling out, and then Bobby's like, we didn't know if you liked, would talk to us because you took a shot at him or threatened to kill him or whatever. And so
Right. He was like, well, he is annoying, or he can be really annoying. And the rest of us were like, yeah, we get it. So, I mean, none of us are particularly surprised when hearing that even from one of his friends, John was facing, so.
Jeffrey Dean Morgan has said on more than one occasion that he has absolutely no doubt in his mind that John loved his boys with everything he had, as much as he had it. As sometimes people have given you all they have, even if it isn't enough for you. And
Right.
John gave them all he had, even though it wasn't enough. And I think it's interesting that Jeffrey Dean Morgan believes that John loved them with his whole being.
I mean, he became obsessed to get revenge for his wife, right? And push other people away. And really, we've seen the other characters do that at different points in their lives. They get so obsessed sometimes with revenge or whatever. They're their own worst enemy sometimes. So that is another theme, I guess, in this season, is figuring that out.
Well, that's
I think we see. Oh, go ahead, Carol.
I was just going to say that was an interesting comment, though, Gail, that the actor himself actually believed that, because it makes it kind of makes you think about the whole portrayal in a different way.
I was just going to say that I think we see throughout season 1 how much John loves them, because he is purposely distancing himself from them because he thinks it's going to protect them. He thinks that's what's best. So I feel like he's already lost his wife, and he's going to do whatever he has to do to make sure that his sons are safe. And, I think he does love them fiercely. He just doesn't communicate it very well at all.
That's a good way.
Well, does anyone know from because you guys would probably be a little deeper into this side of things, but when in that first season, John's age in comparison to Sam and Dean's age versus 15 years later, their ages, what would Dean at the end of the show be the sort of age equivalent of what John was in this season 1? Does anybody know what the age differences are?
No, he would have been
like their emotional
John,
maturity.
Yeah, well, in terms of actual age, at the beginning of the series, the two guys are 22 and 26. So, and if 15 years later, which it's supposed to be 15 years, then I mean, until we see, like old dead Sam, but I mean, or old and dying Sam, you know what I mean? I don't think that. I think that John would have had to have been older than that.
Would he have been like the age equivalent, the emotional age equivalent, dealing with his boys in this season 1 as the adult Sam and Dean in the final season? So
if Sam and Dean are 22 and 25, he has to be at least 45, right? Because he did time in the military, which they wouldn't take him till he was 18. So I'm going to say 2 years, right? So he would be 45. So it feels like he starts the story 5 years older than Dean ever gets to be. Is that cold? Can I say that?
Because I was thinking, the equivalent of what if Sam and Dean had kids at his age, would they have been
like that? Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I've been wondering about that. Yeah.
But Dean had a son. I mean, arguably, right? Have we ever really solved that question?
Headcanon.
I mean, okay, so the kid looks exactly like him and acts like him, and Dean slept with his mother in the right time period, but the mom says no. That kid. And I think Dean still did a better job.
Well, he'd had practice raising. I mean, Dean was a compassionate person. The thing we don't get with John, and it might solve a lot of this, is we don't know how his mom dealt with his father disappearing on them. That Did she drink herself into an early grave? Did she become bitter and angry? Was she abusive? We don't know. We don't know what he saw in Vietnam. Vietnam was a hellhole. And we don't know what he experienced and what traumatized him and how much PTSD he came back from the war with. And then
it was exacerbated by a demon. Yeah.
And his wife dies in a horrible way. And he crawls into a bottle. That's not that hard to understand, given that only hippies got therapy back in that era. Therapy was not what middle America went and did. And so I think there's a real interesting potential backstory there that doesn't excuse John, but perhaps if we knew it would make us more compassionate to the damaged person that he was.
Well, that's true. I mean, you don't always know what that background is if they don't give it to you. Sometimes it's hard to know. Okay. And so Melissa's comment here is, he put his infant in the arms of his preschooler and expected the preschooler to get the out of a house fire.
A+ parenting.
Yeah, and well, and something else that kind of struck me in that episode home, when they're trying to get when Sam and Dean are trying to get that family out of the house. Sam says the exact same words to that child that were said to Dean. It's take your brother outside and don't look back. Don't look behind you. It's something like that. And it was like, so that was weird, because it's like, well, you were 6 months old, so you don't remember exactly what he said. And we find out during the course of the season that Sam was not aware that Dean was the one who carried him out of the house until it came up in some conversation. So that was, I think, kind of a big moment for Sam at that point too, to realize, well, I don't remember my mom because I was a 6-month-old baby, but my brother not only witnessed the death of his mother, but he had to be made responsible for, my safety as well. So maybe that did something to help him appreciate his brother a bit. I don't know. Now, my final question is about the finale, which, again, since it had been 15 years, I forgot. Now, when I say that I have not watched a lot of the specific episodes. I didn't remember that it ended on the kind of cliffhanger that it did. When it comes to remembering general things that happened, yes, I can do that. But, after all that time, seeing that final scene was just like, oh my God, they're going to leave it here, And it was funny because when I was watching it, I was like, oh my God. And my husband's down the hall and he's like, oh, was that a good ending? Or whatever. So but I would like, and it was kind of a 2-part finale anyway, but I would like to get your impressions of that season finale and how did you feel about it? And Marks, we'll begin with you.
Yeah, I mean, it was very strong, tied everything together. Yeah, that truck scene at the end was awesome.
I remember
when I first watched it, I was like, oh my gosh, and I can't believe you just ended the season this way.
Exactly.
So that was great. Yeah, I mean, it just tied up a lot, but still left a lot to explore with a lot of the characters. I just found it really funny. This is a silly little tangent, I guess, but like the guy who plays the brother, the demon's son, who is the brother of Meg. He was in First Wave, and I liked that show when it was on. I watched it and stuff, and I remember when we got excited when we first saw him appear, and we are like, "Oh wow, he's going to be on this show." And then, by the time it's over and he dies, you're just like, he spoke one line. It's like, what?
Right. We didn't hear him say much. Yeah.
No. But anyway, sorry, that was a side thing. But but yeah, it was. I thought it was great, and there's a lot of other finales that have that kind of vibe too, of bringing the season together while also leaving us with some unanswered questions.
Yeah, like everybody unconscious in a car. Yeah.
Yeah, dead or alive, who knows? So,
Rachel.
So a couple of things struck me when I think it's in Devil's Trap when they are torturing Meg and Dean wants to do the exorcism and Sam says, no, we could use her. And the comfort that Dean is trying to show to this woman who's been possessed for a year, and Sam is sort of saying, well, what about Dad? What about this? We need to know. And so that it just struck me as colder and a little bit harsher than what we've seen 15 years later. They were definitely driven. And so there was a lot of vulnerability and a lot of hurt for me. For some reason, rewatching it, those emotions felt rawer. They felt they felt a little crueler, a little colder. And the truck hitting baby, I must have repressed. I love that car more than any other car I could name. And I like you, Carol. I shouted. I was shocked. I had completely forgotten that baby just gets obliterated at the end, and it was just, wow, you really ripped everything these guys had away by the end of that series, and or that season. And I don't know, I was struck by how harsh it all seemed. So great, gripping television, but wow, tough, a lot of emotions, a lot going on.
Okay. Kristen.
Let's see. For me, the cliffhanger ending was about as dramatic as up to that point in television that I can remember. Save for like Alias season 1, where Vaughn sacrifices himself and he's drowning, and they leave it there. And I felt the same way. I spent the whole summer gleaning fan sites to look for clues that Sam, did they survive? Are we going to just go a completely different direction with the show where only one brother survives or the dad dies? I mean, I spent the whole summer obsessing and trying to find hints as to what was going to come next. So that was like a highly dramatic thing. Also, I thought it was interesting that as fans, we latched on to Carry On. But Carry On and The Road So Far wasn't even the finale. It was the episode before the finale. And so Fight the Good Fight by Triumph was the song that kicked off the final episode of the first season. So as fans, why did we gravitate towards Carry On as opposed to Fight the Good Fight? That was kind of just something that occurred to me. It was like, I wonder why we chose the one song versus the one that actually was that year's season finale song.
Well, I think that the inclination towards that may have been there all along, because I don't know if it was in the episode where they go to the ghost the go with the ghost facers when or no, that's, oh yeah, it is, when they go to when the guys go into the record store to talk to the kid that he and his cousin were the ones who actually formed the tulpa by doing what they did and all of this. And the first time that they go in the record store, Dean picks up the Kansas album and he's looking at it, and it shows it clearly. And I thought, well, that's a little bit of foreshadowing. And that was kind of fun. I also, just to interject about that I've enjoyed all along, of course, hearing the soundtrack of everything. But so that's been fun to revisit some of that as well in this first season.
yeah, I think so. So my DVDs were having some problems, so I watched it on Netflix, and I hated it because they don't have that music on Netflix. They couldn't get the license.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Oh
it's
no.
terrible.
I watched it on
Wow.
Netflix as well, and the song isn't there.
It's terrible.
Oh.
So if anybody watches this and they've only seen it on Netflix, they really need to get a DVD because it's a totally different experience. So that music makes a big difference in some of those things. The opening scene of Skin, it just was not the same without that music.
Yeah.
So.
But it's only season 1 that they didn't have the rights to. After that, the music is the same on Netflix and the DVDs.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's
Okay, so there you have it, folks. I guess not as though you have to buy. Yeah, I've got them, but yeah. So that's the way I've been watching them. Gail.
I think didn't we skip Kristen? I think we skipped
Nope, I
Kristen.
said mine.
Okay.
Yeah, she already. Yeah.
I was really glad that I came in on season 11 because I never would have lived through all those cliffhanger. Not only that, but I'm eternally grateful to the Super Wiki because anytime it got too stressful, I would go out to the Super Wiki and read a couple of episodes ahead. So I know, okay, they're still alive. Okay, Sam lives through it. Dean lives through it. Because I'm terrible about reading the end of books. And if I'm not writing them to know how they end, then I'm going to go look at the end first if it's too suspenseful. Terrible habit. So I probably wouldn't have survived doing this in real time. And I thought it was a phenomenal cliffhanger ending. I mean, talk about people being there for the first episode of the next season just to see what happened from a mechanical standpoint. That was brilliant. And it was very well done. Yeah, it got you right in the feels. But I never would have survived watching it in real time without the wiki and being able to jump ahead and just binge. Because there were some episodes I told my husband, I said, okay, we've got to watch this one, but then we at least have to watch another 2 episodes afterwards to see how it works out. We can't stop after this episode. Just be aware.
So yeah, you're like get your beverage or your snacks and just have a seat and strap in for a while. Now this was in agreement with you, Kristen, about the cliffhanger and immediately buying season 2 on DVD. So yeah, how else could you get by? Beth.
Yeah, I'm with Rachel. Of all the casualties that season 1 had, Baby upset me the most. I just, it hurts as much now to watch that scene as it did 15 years ago. And I just think it's interesting that, as I mentioned before, John was trying so hard to distance himself from the boys to keep them safe and thinking that if they were separated, then his sons would be okay. And yet we end season 1 with all 3 of them there together in the car. And It's like, yep, you're all in it together now. So I just think that's interesting that for all of his effort to separate and keep them safe, that it all came to naught in the end.
So does anyone think the mundane nature of that car accident harkens back or harkens forward, I guess, echoes Dean and the hook of doom in the barn? Like, one of the things that really struck me with that car accident in the season, it could have been anyone. Yes, we know it was a demon, but it could have been any truck. These guys drive terribly on old roads in a car that doesn't have airbags, and they could get killed just by a drunkard.
Right.
And then how does Dean eventually die? He literally falls on a random hook nail thing in an old barn.
They didn't have God luck anymore. That was the problem.
Well, they clearly didn't have it in the beginning either.
Yeah, right. No, that is a good point. Yeah, that it does. But that adds to, I think, the feel that we all get. That enough of it is grounded in reality that it gives that that immediacy to it. And I mean, that's why those of us who love urban fantasy, that's one of the big appeals, I think, whether you're talking about media or books. And I think that just the idea, I think it's a really good point. I hadn't really thought about that aspect of it, but I will say the one thing that struck me about the car is that I thought it was funny that, in later seasons, Dean pampers that car like crazy. I don't remember when it starts. I'll find out. But John makes a comment to him about, it's pretty much, it's in one of the last few episodes. He's like, Dean, you need to be taking better care of this car. And I thought, because it was funny, because prior to him saying that, I'd had the same thought, not that he was doing anything wrong, but that he was doing differently than the way he did later. So I just thought it was kind of amusing.
Maybe that's why.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
That's why
Well,
Dean doesn't like Sam to drive anymore, because that happened when he's driving.
Fair enough.
that was fun.
What were you going to say, Gail?
How did they get Carry On? Eric Kripke said, we had an old jukebox in our basement growing up. I found a song on it that I liked and played a lot, Carry On My Wayward Son. So that comes from Kripke God himself.
Okay.
And on the finale thing with the rebar, I figured it was bringing things around again because Sam got stabbed in the back at Cold Oak. And so Dean got stabbed in the back in a different way. You had that mirroring, which is what I got out of the rebar. But you're right. They could have died at any time.
I think I also felt like when I watched the episode Faith, and he gets he gets electrocuted in an accident, that also echoed to me that, like, this is such a danger. Anything random thing can happen, because that's such a accidental thing that almost killed him.
Yeah, and it could, as you said, it could have been, pretty much anybody, anytime, the kind of thing.
And
Now,
with the final episode, even though I knew what was coming, I still had that full body flinch when the truck plowed into Baby. I mean, I knew it was coming, and it still was that much of just a shock to see that happen.
well, and that goes, I think, a long way to showing how much of an impact the scene has. That even if you remember it, which for those of us who did not, that that it had this huge impact. But that for those of you who had seen it more recently than when it originally aired, you still felt that way when you saw it. And I have another scene like that from another show that I could mention, but I won't do that since we're not talking about that one right now. But and I know we're kind of over time, and people might have other things they want to do, but I just or need to do, and like in best case, maybe go to bed eventually.
Someday.
But if anybody has any final observations or comments about the season they'd like to make, I'd love to hear that. And mine is that I kind of got a kick out of it that they, they're always talking about, well, we can't tell people what it is we do, and we're trying to keep the supernatural aspect of life hidden from everybody. And yet, in like almost every single episode in this season, they end up having to tell somebody. I mean, they're coming out with, it's not a big secret anymore. I mean, and I literally, when I was looking through my notes, I was like, okay, so which season? And I wrote them down, and it was, I don't know. I mean, almost every single one. Oh, I don't know about Bugs because I didn't watch that one. But almost every single episode, they're having to, talk to somebody to explain, well, this is what we do. And I think, I can't remember which episode it was, but this one young woman asked Sam, well, this is what you guys do. How'd you get a job like that? And he said, I had a terrible guidance counselor. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
But to me, that was just kind of amusing because, they do have this, this idea. Well, they're not only trying to protect people, they're trying to protect them they're trying to keep the knowledge secret too, or protect people from the knowledge of those things. And yet they're, still sneaks out. Anybody else have any observations they would?
I mean, it was even better than I thought it would be first time around. So,
Oh,
and I,
there you go.
yeah, and I was really amazed by I was like, Ghostfacers started already. I didn't know they were in this so early, or I'd forgotten. And
But they aren't called that in that
no,
that
they're not
episode.
yet. Not yet. They have their website. I forget what it's called, but yeah. So I think, I mean, this is a really great season. Like if you're going to start a urban fantasy show or whatever, I think you should definitely look at this season as a great example of how to start off a show. But yeah, and I think, and what's interesting about these early seasons is because they don't know as much and it's more mysterious. It has more of a horror feel than later seasons. I love both. I love all seasons, but the demons in this season, especially those last few episodes, are like really like, how are they going to survive this? It's like seems so overpowering compared to every, because it went to add to the impact of that truck. It was also like, wow, so anybody could be a demon anytime. I thought that was really great.
Yeah, that did add a new element to see how easily that they were passed on. The way that in the finale where the demon outside goes up to one of the firefighters and touches him, and then all of a sudden, he's possessed too. So it's like, dang,
Yeah.
you guys are going to be in trouble.
And it gives all new meaning to what John was saying earlier. Like, you don't understand, they're everywhere. And so,
right.
Another thing that kind of stood out to me. Oh, go ahead, Gail.
No, go ahead.
Well, one other thing that stood out to me was that they were kind of walking all of us as viewers through their world, like saying, oh, there's a cold spot. Well, that means there's a ghost in the area, or, you need to pour down salt because, and they kind of explain each of the little steps and signs, and they kind of drop that later on because, hey, we know what all those little signs and symbols mean. So it kind of stood out to me that, what we saw in later seasons wasn't at all what was going on in the first season, where they were kind of introducing us to each of these little tricks and hunter tricks and different types of ways to identify monsters or signs and symbols. So I kind of thought that was fun to look back at that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. They do that.
Yeah, they didn't even know what a devil's trap was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bobby.
Yeah. The thing that really stuck out to me this time, and I don't think it hit me on any of the other rewatches, was in that car crash. So there's a demon. Somebody sent the demon to possess the truck driver. It hits on Sam's side of the car. If Azazel has plans for Sam Winchester and Sam's his favorite, what was Azazel thinking? Did he just think he'd bring Sam back if he needed to? That made me kind of wonder, in hindsight, why would you do that? Now, granted, the cars back then were, solid steel, so your chances were a lot better even without airbags. But I did wonder, well, why? What was his game? Because he didn't know that John was going to make the deal to save Dean. He couldn't have planned that far. I just thought, well, hard way to show that this guy's your favorite, that you want to have lead your army.
Well, he does have others. So maybe in that brief moment, he was just so mad. I mean, he did lose both his kids, so he just kind of took a chance. He had backups.
Get backups, yeah.
Who knows? And a spare.
Sounds like a good canon or fan fiction story that needs to be explored.
Well, there you go. I'm sure someone, if they haven't picked that up, that they
will.
And
the Green Cooler has its own niche of fan fiction. I'm sure it's been done somewhere.
That Green Cooler is crazy famous. So yeah.
Wow.
Green Cooler. Oh my. That's an interesting attention to detail right there. But
which now that I was watching for it, I saw it in several first season episodes, and I had never noticed it before. But now that I know how important it is, you know, after you throw the werepyre's head in it later on in Baby, now that I know how important it is, I start noticing it from the very beginning.
That it's been there all along. Just yeah.
And to me, that's the theme of the first season. Is now that I've watched the whole thing, I'm like, no, there are a million things that they pull throughout the series. There's a million conflicts that are never going to get resolved the way I want them to. You know, that A+ parenting is never going to get any better. That relationship is always going to be problematic. And yeah, wow, I'm just really impressed with the writers. Having rewatched, wow, they did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, I'm really glad that I'll take credit for having this idea to go back and watch it and be. I mean, it's more fun to do it when I can talk with all of you
Yeah.
lovely people about it, and it's made me really glad that I did that because as I said in the beginning, I have not most of these I have not seen since they first aired. Or if I did, I may have seen them twice in the first season, but since then, I probably had not. In the later seasons, there were some that I watched more than once, and mainly that was because of the formation of the Urban Fantasy Track. But in any case, I think it's been a lot of fun having this discussion. I hope that all of you on the panel have had a good time. I hope that our viewers have had a good time. And whether you have been here live with us tonight, we thank you for taking part, or whether you watch this later, we hope that you will enjoy it. We will be doing season 2 in March. That date has not been chosen yet, but that will, stay tuned to the track Facebook page. And, we will make sure and let everybody know. The other thing I've got going on in March is the author interview for March will be with Clay and Susan Griffith, longtime supporter track, and I'm looking forward to that. And let's see, Melissa had a nice thank you to everyone. Thank you, Melissa. We appreciate your comments and everybody else who left comments. But thanks, everybody. I'll give you guys a hand. You've been a wonderful panel and audience. And we look forward to seeing everyone next month for our discussion of season 2. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Carol. Bye.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.